Hello and welcome to another deep dive episode of Football Today. I'm joined again by the amazing David Goss. David, are you ready for some French football talk today?
I'm very excited about this episode. We're going to be talking about Lille, OSC. First, I think I'd like to apologize for mispronouncing everything that's about to happen and having the worst French accent I've never even tried before. But I'm very excited about this episode because every year I kind of get like a pet team where it's like, I have to watch them. They're entertaining. This is special. It's been Napoli in the past, Atletico Madrid, some teams in the Bundesliga, Dortmund off and on, Leipzig over the last year, and Lille is my team this year. So I've been locked in watching them all year. I love what they're doing. And I was very excited to get you into this topic because didn't seem like you wanted to do it at first. And now over the last 48 hours, you are all in.
Yeah, well, because to be honest, I've been thinking about doing a Lille episode all year, but we did a number of smaller teams that started the season well and were in like first, second, or third, like Sassuolo.
You got burned by Famali Cow, huh?
Yeah, exactly. And I was just like, I don't want to do an episode on them. And then like they have 2 rough weeks, and next thing I know, they're like in 5th place, and we look like total idiots. We did an episode on Atletico Madrid, and I don't know if they've won a game since. So, anyway,
which is a story in itself.
Exactly. Maybe we should just do follow-ups for the rest of 2021. But so that's the reason we didn't do it. But after they did they had the win this past weekend, I was like, okay, we can do this. This is legit. There's 7 games left, and as you mentioned, they had a huge win against PSG this weekend, 1-0. Jonathan David getting the lone goal, and a game where, like, just from my perspective, they didn't seem frazzled or worried at all by PSG. They looked in command, and you would not have expected, PSG that they were the team that had won like 4, titles in a row. It did not look like that sort of imbalance between the two teams, and they always looked dangerous on the counter. Dave, did you watch this game?
Of course I did. First of all, Jonathan David, born in New York City, greatest city in the history of the world.
Yeah, Brooklyn, right?
Yeah. Haitian, and now obviously Canadian international. So I did watch this game, and I agree with everything you said. And that's kind of been Lille's story this year. Is there's been games where they've been less goal dangerous, but they are dominant defensively, and they're just such a settled group. They don't look worried. They don't look harried. And what's impressive is they stepped up and played the way they did against PSG, the same way they've played against everyone else throughout the year. And I think that's to your point of this could be real. That's the development for them is, well, if they can do this at the highest level, then they are probably title favorites, at least title contenders.
Yeah, and they lost to PSG in the Cup, I think it was a week or 2 earlier, 3-0. So it was definitely, they could have lost again like that. But Dave, since we're talking about a team that not many people know about, including myself, honestly, I didn't know almost anything about Lille before doing research for this episode and kind of their history. Can you take us through Lille and, where is it in France? I think a lot of people don't even know where it is in France and kind of, their backstory a little bit.
Yeah, so it's based in Lille, which makes it super simple. On a river, it's pretty close to the France-Belgium border. 113 kilometers is what Josh wrote, because I would never use kilometers, but I know that the people need it, so I'm okay with it. One of the things that I found in reading the way people described it, at least in the pitch about Lille, is it's almost directly in between Paris, London, and Amsterdam, as well as, of course, Belgium and Germany just next to it. So a lot of people feel like it could be this amazing central place, and maybe the team could get support there. It's nicknamed in France the capital of Flanders. It is the 4th largest urban area in France, roughly about 2 million people, and one of the youngest metro areas in France. So there's a lot of excitement around that of what the city could be going forward, as well as for the club. The club was founded in 1944 in a merger between 2 other clubs. And Josh, this is your fact here, so I'm gonna let you say this coming up. What are they known fondly as?
They're known fondly as Les Duges. I mean, I'm probably getting that pronunciation wrong. It probably means what that Les Duges means is the Mastiffs. And that's a kind of dog for you non-dog lovers out there, including myself, who knows almost nothing about dogs. And these dogs are the ones with the really droopy face. They're kind of quite big, kind of popular in England a little bit, I think.
Well, I think English Mastiff is a specific breed of it. I also think this is the dog from the movie Beethoven, where the dogs don't talk, but you follow them the whole time. That came out in like the 80s and 90s. Unconfirmed, because again, I don't know dogs either, but I'm putting that out there.
Yeah. And so just like per the Ligue website, which is where I found this, I'm just going to read kind of the backstory of why they're known as the Mastiffs. According to Patrick Robert, or Robert, the origin of the nickname dates back to the 1930s, before the modern club was founded. And that was because after a match against Paris, won by one of these teams that kind of merged with another team, a Parisian journalist compared the players to Mastiffs because they never gave up.
Wow.
And as I mentioned, two teams kind of formed together to join and become Lille. So this was one of the teams before they ended up forming to become Lille. So interesting little backstory. Always cool to get like a little background on that. And so you'll see the Mastiff on their shirt. And then also they have a dog, a statue at their training ground, at their new like training ground that was built in 2007, which has to be pretty cool to just have like a, dog statue at your training ground. I don't know. But Dave, if you had to have a dog be like the emblem of your club, you used to be a fan of Arsenal, what would it be?
So if anyone doesn't know, there's a Liga MX team in Tijuana. Their name is literally Cholos Tijuana. And Cholos is a type of dog that's famous for the area. It's like a hairless dog, kind of has like a beagle-y face type thing. It's fairly gross, but they have a mascot that's like a version of that with huge muscles that wears a jersey and walks around. And it's a great name. Like Cholos is such a fun name to say. How many teams start with an X? So I don't know that it would be the dog I would want. Again, not a dog person, totally, not an animal person or a pet person like that. But I think that would be my name that I would choose if I had to pick a dog for a team.
Yeah.
Is that fair? Am I
no, that's a good shout. Honestly, a really good shout. I would choose a Labrador just because the only dog I've ever owned in my life was a Labrador. So,
and you would be the team that runs around just happy the whole time.
Yeah, exactly.
Regardless of results.
Exactly. Easily distracted as well. But speaking of distractions, we're a little easily distracted. Let's get back to their history a little bit. Dave, can you talk about like kind of their most successful period in their history and, bring us till today?
So from 1946 to 56 is what's considered the most successful period in Lille's history. And then from 1960 on, a long period of anonymity. They were weighed down by a lack of facilities and resources, and Lille abandoned its professional status. It was feared the club might disappear. In 1990, their president stepped down, and it took them a few years, and they started to recover financially. They built a new training ground in 2007, and since 2012, they've played at the Stade Pierre Moreau.
Yeah, we're really going to be butchering names today, guys.
Yeah. Which has a capacity over 50K. Now, when I think of Lille and hear the name, the first thing I think of is Rudi Garcia and Eden Hazard. And so around from 2010 to 2012 was a huge time of success for the club. They won a double in the 2011-2012 season. And this team, Josh, is so legendary. So you put down.
Yeah, because honestly, I don't remember this team at all. I like at the time.
You don't remember the French star Eden Hazard who led Lille?
Okay, well, let me explain why. So I fell in love with French football, to be honest, back in the mid-2000s when Fox Soccer Channel in the States was on, and they would always show the 3 p.m. kickoff, which is now the 8 o'clock if you're in Europe. The 8 o'clock kickoff or 3 p.m. in the States. And that was always the French game of the week, which it still is. And you would normally have like Lyon. That was when they were in their heyday.
Right.
A lot of great players like Juninho. And then, they say Etienne was really good at the time. This is when PSG was like, not an underdog, but like definitely not what they are today. And like the announcer, I wish I tried to find who it was, but I don't know his name. Just had like this great voice, and he used to do the game solo. And I loved French football then. Game of the week, loved it. All the players were really fun and exciting. And so, but then they took it off Fox Soccer, and I kind of just lost interest in watching. So, Dave, what did I miss? What did I miss in this team? Tell me.
Well, so It was Hazard as an 18-year-old leading this group. You put down Moussa Sow, who scored over 20 goals for that team. Gervinho as well. They had in that group, so this is the same team that won the double, out of their academy, Johan Cabaye, Mathieu Debuchy, and Idrissa Gueye, who's now at PSG. The team had signed Adil Rami as well a few years earlier. So that is like a squad. I mean, you're talking about that midfield that's loaded on both wings, that has Cabaye and Idrissa Gueye in central midfield. And whether you win or lose games, if Johan Cabaye is in your team, it's pure happiness. Like, he is maybe not the most winning player, but he's joy on the soccer field.
Yeah, I mean, those guys are like very high ceiling, low floors, depending on the game. And no one, epitomizes it. And Gervinho too. Like, I'm secretly a big fan of Gervinho. I always loved watching him play.
It shouldn't be a secret. Everyone should be a Gervinho fan. But so since that team, I've been like a Rudi Garcia apologist, because it's been up and down for him. He obviously went to Roma, a lot of expectations. Now he's back in France with Marseille after the Andre Villas-Boas chaos. And Marseille is actually interesting. We have a lot about French football in this, and Marseille right now are not like in the conversation as could be a big team, should compete, when I think for many people, Marseille is their first reference point to French club football, ahead of PSG because of their history over the years and more stability at many times than most of these clubs. I think the Velodrome, to many of us, is one of those games you have to go to and have to see. And I hope to one day with fans.
Definitely. Well, we'll have to go at some point. Yeah, and I should have mentioned them when I started watching French football back in the mid-2000s. They were another fun team to watch. Exactly. And the other fun fact I saw from that team that won the double with Moussa Sow, you might be like, who the hell is Moussa Sow? The reason you don't know who Moussa Sow is he scored 25 goals that year and then never scored 20 again. He was like a one-hit wonder to some degree. Ended up playing in Turkey, but just, it's just one of those
Alves-esque.
Exactly. Just one of those classic teams that and we'll, I'm sure, talk about it, had a really high pinnacle and then it dropped real fast.
Boom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that leads us to this kind of moment of instability at the club. After Garcia left for Roma in 2013, from the year of 2013 until the end of 2017, the club had 7 different coaches, and most famously had Marcelo Bielsa for about 13 games. And this is a really fun fact I found when we were doing research, and I couldn't believe it when I saw it. In the year of 2017, the calendar year, they had 5 different managers, which must be a record. It must be. I don't know the other, contenders, but I can't imagine any team having more than 5 managers, maybe in Brazil.
That's why Brazil has to outlaw changing managers now. I'm surprised neither of us got called in at some point.
I know.
I mean, 5 deep, you're already starting to scrape the bottom of the barrel.
Yeah. And so then, this takes us. And so while we're talking about instability, that's not just with managers. It's also kind of with ownership. They've had 3 owners in the last 4 years. And a lot of, obviously, when you have a lot of owners, that usually means a lot of financial troubles. And we will get into that. I mean, we might as well just get into why they have all of these financial issues, because when the club, Gerard Lopez, when he came in January 2017, Marcelo Bielsa comes in the summer. They spend £58 million, and then Bielsa leaves after 13 games. And essentially, I can't say it better than this Guardian article that came out back in December, which kind of spells everything out quite plainly. French football's notorious strict financial watchdog, the DNCG, banned Lille from signing players in January 2018 and told Lille that they had to raise 30 million euros in player sales in the summer of 2018, threatening the club with relegation to Ligue 2 for financial irregularities. So that was they were banned for January of 2018, and then in the summer they said, you have to sell 30 million euros worth of players because otherwise you're going down a league. You may be wondering, how in the world did this happen? They were literally bought in January of 2017. How does this happen? Dave, do you want to explain how this could happen?
I think it's a story that we're all becoming, unfortunately, fairly familiar with, which is Gerard Lopez bought the team with debt using JP Morgan and investment fund Elliott Management, who I know you've talked about around AC Milan, that they're currently operating because, again, they gave a loan to buy that team. Over the last 4 years, Lille have paid back around half those loans, with 123 million euros due to be paid back in August. Concerned from the two management companies that they wouldn't receive the money their own, Elliott pressured Lopez into finally selling the club. And it's one of those things I think we're starting to become unfortunately familiar with, right? Is ownership groups taking over a club that they can't afford to operate, with this idea that they can cash in on Champions League or player sales and somehow make up the difference. And most of the time, the fans are the ones that are hurt.
Yeah, exactly. And, just to kind of undersell that point, before the club was sold in December, or when the club, was sold in December, their new president said that if the club had not been sold, they were facing insolvency. It was that bad. And as we pointed out, this is still not over yet, right? I mean, 123 million euros to be paid in August is expected. So there's been a cash injection once these new owners came in. They, gave some money to keep the club afloat, but this is far from over, this financial instability. Now,
we have to point out, of course, with COVID, that's been a major reason for this for a lot of French clubs. Yeah. The loss of television money, and now the loss, we mentioned their stadium could hold 50,000, although they were operating at a loss at times with their stadium as well, and mismanagement. And the other thing is, we talked about the need to sell players and make money. They have done that to a historic level at times over the last few windows. And so potentially if COVID had not hit and maybe a lot of the player sale numbers had stayed where it was expected, they could have hit it as well. Victor Osimhen going to Napoli last year for 70 million euros. Of course, Gabriel at Arsenal and Pepe at Arsenal before that. Some of the big sales that this club's been able to make to try and start to make their way back from the financial instability that they've been under since Lopez took over.
And so now we're going to get into kind of this transition from this really bad state where the club was firing managers all the time to when it kind of got on sound feet. And so really that all kind of happened after this really big moment in March of 2018 when their instability and unrest kind of all climaxed. And that was in a game against Montpellier, where the team drew 1-1. And at this point, this put the team second from bottom in the relegation zone. And the fans just went crazy, point blank. They threw objects, players were kicked. I mean, there's a video online that I watched that, I had to rewatch it a good 10 times because it was just crazy. You're where do I look first? They literally run from one side of the pitch to the other. The players are on the right side of the pitch and the fans leave behind the back goal on the left side from the camera angle and run all the way across the pitch. And it's so crazy because the players don't even react. I think they're so emotionally drained and disappointed in themselves that they don't even move at first. And there's a crazy moment where it looks like a woman. I mean, if it's a man, it could be, but this person had a really long blonde ponytail, and you can literally see her run up and just push Pepe in the upper chest and not seem phased at all doing it. And it's just a crazy scene. It's no other word for it.
Nicolas Pepe has to be pulled off the field after that because he starts to react.
Yeah.
And the steward has to pull him off the field because they can't get all the fans off the field because there are, as you said, well over 100 fans that have charged the field at that point.
Yeah, this was not just 50, this is not some small sect of ultras where it's 50.
It's basically the entire section behind the goal that charges. And then they show in the crowd, the front office, the executives, and they just look dumbfounded. They can't believe what's happening. I think you should tweet that link out.
Yeah, I should. Yeah.
It's a ridiculous video to watch. Unfortunate, but one of the more shocking things you'll see.
Yeah. And then, so the craziest thing happens after this. So they end up surviving. This is in the third month of Christophe Galtier, who's their current manager's reign at the club. So he kind of stabilizes them, gets them to survive. They finished 17th that season. And then the most incredible things happen. I mean, honestly, this is maybe the most remarkable story that most people don't know about, or maybe it was just me that didn't know about this. I don't know, maybe you did. But they went from finishing 17th that season to finishing second the next season. And you might be thinking oh, okay, that's really impressive. But, how does it get more impressive? They went from a minus 26 goal differential to plus 35. That is a 61 goal difference between the two seasons. Just for some context, the year that Leicester won the title, they had a 41 goal difference. Like, that's absurd. There's no way that there's a team that has a higher change in goal difference from year to year in like modern history. If you're listening, find it for us, tweet it at us, tell us. Like, that's absurd. Absolutely absurd. And Dave, tell them the best. It might be the best transfer window of all time. Tell them the transfer window.
They bought Jose Font, who you will know that name fairly well, Zeki Shelik, a Turkish international, Jonathan Ikone, Reinaldo, Rafael Leao, and Jonathan Bamba for a combined 9 million euros. And all of those players go on to be linchpins for them going forward. And you wrote down, and I don't disagree with you, might be the greatest summer window of all time for pure amount of quality for price and what they've done. So you've said Christopher Galtier's name.
Yeah.
Josh, the other big name we have to now bring in here is Luis Campos, right? And this is the work that he's been able to do and I texted you when we were coming up with this topic, what's the angle? I think he might be the best in the world at his job, whether you're calling it talent identification, acquisition, selling, sporting director, although that's not technically his title. Do you want to get into it a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, so the weird thing is like Campos is actually not hired technically by Lille. He was hired by the company that owned Lille, Victory Soccer, which owns Scoutly, which is the company that Luis Campos is hired by. If you were just confused by that, I was confused as well for a little while reading it.
As we talked about, I follow this team fairly closely. I did not know that.
Yeah, it's absolutely
coming
crazy.
Into this piece. I thought he was the sporting technical director, whatever his title was. I was sure he was part of this club because he is so closely associated to everything they do and is like the first name mentioned when you talk about their success.
Yeah. So like technically when Lille was sold, like, you know, he wasn't officially done, I don't believe, with the club. But he essentially, and we'll get to like what he did and how he changed the club around. But like, just to finish off on like him, when he finished the club, he hadn't been seen at the club since August 20th. And remember, he left like December 20th. So he went like a good 4 months not being at the club and essentially going on strike. And he was just like, I don't want to be here anymore. And that's kind of how it ended with him. But he totally radically changed the club. And you say the greatest sporting director ever, like potentially, you know, people always think of, Monchi at Sevilla. Mm-hmm. He's only done it at Sevilla. He's done it now at Monaco and at Lille. So I don't even think it's really an argument.
So just a reminder to people, and it'll trigger a memory, but 2016-17 UEFA Champions League, Monaco made it to the semifinal, and that was the team Luis Campos built. So you think about Bernardo Silva, Mbappe, Bakayoko,
Fabinho,
Lamar. Yeah, it just keeps going. And one of the things you see, I think, with Luis Campos' teams, which I find super interesting and fascinating, is he obviously invests heavily in young players. Great talent identification, brings them in. But he also always has veteran stability around them. So in Lille, it's Jose Font, we talked about, who's been massive to everything they've done. And at this point, he's 35 years old. And Burak Yilmaz, another name many people will recognize, and crushed it with Turkey over the course of World Cup qualifying a few weeks ago. Also 34 or 35, their leading goal scorer. If you remember those Monaco teams, it was Falcao up top, who was the veteran leader, and Glick, the Polish center back, at the back. And then a ton of young players in the space in between. And so he's found this way to not just identify the talent, not just nurture it, but then also be successful. Because many of the great quote unquote selling clubs aren't always successful year to year on the field in their production and in their ability to compete. And this Monaco team, I think, is one of the best teams we've seen for a really long time. I think his first month in the door, he signed Martial to the B team and Mbappe into the academy, as well as Lamar. So not a bad way to get started.
Yeah. And as you said, like, you know, if Lille, and we'll get to that later, if they go on to win the title, he will have won a title with both of his last projects. So as you said, not just, you know, selling it for the wages, although we have to get to that, like the insane numbers at play here. You mentioned a lot of the guys that they've kind of sold: Pepe, Osimhen, Gabriel, Leao. That's literally just in the last 2 years. And over the last 3 seasons, their net transfer spend, and this is like just the last 3 years, is 170 million euros. 170 in the last 3 years on the positive. And that also once again underlines how bad their financial issues have been.
Yeah, for sure.
They are still in a massive financial hole despite 170 million pound net spend. And yet they're still competing. As we said, like this whole episode is about them leading the league. So absolutely crazy. I think now is like a good time to talk about why they are winning this year.
Well, also, we mentioned Christopher Galtier, him as a coach, what he's been able to do coming from Saint Etienne, obviously one of the big clubs in France, that he was able to stabilize towards the top of the table, and then coming to Lille. And in mentioning that PSG game, it was a 1-0 win for Lille. That's been the story over the course of this year, is they are one of the best defensive sides in all of Europe. Contending alongside Atletico Madrid in their ability to not concede goals, to not concede space behind them, to keep the ball in front of them, to stay as a compact team. And then they've got great young attackers that are able to create opportunities for them. And I love the comparison with Atletico Madrid, because one of the things about Lille that you see when they play is how direct and how assured they are the moment they win the ball and how they want to attack. And so Renato Sanchez, who of course was so great for Portugal in the Euros, sold to Bayern Munich, up and down experience there, and one of those players that I think everyone gave up on, and we do it too fast. And this team's a great example of this, actually. He's in this team, and it fits perfectly for him, because he wants to play north-south. He wants to be aggressive, in that Vidal mold, whatever it is. He's been phenomenal for this team. And then they've brought in a ton of great attacking pieces that all fit together. So Jonathan Ikone has been huge for this group, his ability to play on the wing, play up top. Timothy Weah as well, in a similar mold of that flexible attacking player. Burak Yilmaz, I mentioned, leading the team in goals. And then the big signing to replace Victor Osimhen this year has been Jonathan David, the young Canadian coming out of Belgium. They signed him for 27 million euros, which in the offseason, I didn't fully understand how a team at this level was going to spend that money. And I think that's part of the frustration of what's happened, right? Is Luis Campos looks at it and says, well, I've turned a plus 170 million margin. I can spend that because I know I can sell higher than that. David, still just 20 years old, is going to get better. Clearly, that wasn't the case for the team. It took Jonathan David a little while to settle in. And one of the things that was impressive about this group is Galtier continued to play him centrally, continued to trust him and let him find his feet. And it came in Europa League. It started to a couple penalty kick goals. And now he's started to help dominate for this team. And so they're a group that it looks like a 4-4-2. It looks like a 4-2-2-2. Those four attacking players are so versatile and can change their positions, which allows them that flexibility, whether it's sitting guys, rotating players, or anything like that. And they're not, pure magic on the field, I don't think you would say, Josh, especially watching them this weekend, right? They're settled, they're controlled, but when their attacking players get in good positions, they can tear another team apart.
Yeah, and they attack quickly. Like their transitions are quick, and they make the most of them a lot. And when I was like kind of going through that, and it's funny you mentioned Jonathan David. I read a piece from Breaking the Lines back in December, and it's great. There's like a line in there where it's like, Jonathan David's been a massive disappointment so far. Yeah. And then it's like, now that we can look 4 months later, and it's like, oh yeah, he's actually been really important to finish the season for them.
And to go along with the Renato Sanchez, Victor Osimhen was a Nigerian youth international, signed into the Bundesliga, and then basically given up on because he couldn't break through, and sold to Belgium. And then Lille brought him in. And so there's the understanding in this club of the time it takes, the opportunity to settle for these players, but look how it paid off for them. And so that's why everyone kept talking in November and December about how poorly it had gone for David. And it felt like at the club, there was no worry, there was no panic. And that's one of the things I saw in his ability to find his feet and settle in, and scored the winner against PSG this weekend, injured his ankle, so he's going to be out for a few weeks, but they've needed what he's given them. And as a club, they were able to continue with him, which I don't know a lot of teams. I mean, look at Chelsea and Timo Werner and even Kai Havertz. Like, A lot of teams in the world just don't do that.
Well, I think also the reason that they could afford to do that, let's be honest, is their defense, right? If you're keeping, they have 17 clean sheets so far this season, 17 out of 31 games. I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that essentially in every other game they're going to have a clean sheet, and it's pretty easy to win if you give up 0 goals every other game. And I do want to kind of just focus on that just a little bit. You know, we mentioned Christophe Galtier, and I said before we started recording, Dave, that he might be the most underrated manager in Europe. And even though honestly I didn't know much about him going into this episode, but like when you look through his history, it's actually remarkable. You know, to compare him with Simeone, like he doesn't have that like kind of force of nature mentality, but they share a lot of similar ideals. And I just want to like go into a little bit of his history for those of you who don't know him. You know, so before he came to Lille, he spent, I think, 8 seasons at Etienne, and in that time he conceded 39 goals per game. His teams conceded 39 goals per season, which is quite good. Like that's, you know, not elite defense, but almost elite defensively. So like a mini Simeone in that regard. And it's of course not with the talent that, you know, a Simeone or an elite team would have at Saint Etienne. And I just wanted to read some other kind of quotes that kind of define who he is. There was a piece in The Guardian, and this is from literally when he was leaving Saint Etienne after his or not even, it was his last season at Saint Etienne. And they said when his team beat arch rivals Lyon last season, he praised them for showing, quote, courage, selflessness, and realism. 3 things that define his managerial outlook. And it's clear that that's just what he's about, is about playing for the team, playing a kind of in a realistic, controlled manner. Like, you know, his 2 fullbacks don't bomb up the pitch together. If one goes up, the other one stays back. And it's just a very balanced team. And, you know, not to get too into tactics, but he plays in like a mid block most of the time, you know, and that means like staying in the middle of the field, and they'll press, you know, in the opposition final third if they given the opportunity. And the best way I kind of looked at it was like, they were almost like Liverpool when Jurgen Klopp first came. People always think of like the heavy metal football that he played the, you know, 3rd or 4th year. But the first year that Klopp came to Liverpool, they played in this mid block. And then when like Lallana got the opportunity, then they pressed. And that's kind of what their team does, is they wait for the opportunity to get high up the pitch and then they press. Otherwise, they stay in this kind of controlled mid block. And the more you just read about him, the more impressive he sounds. And you know, it's just a fun fact. He's been a manager for more than 10 years. I think more than 11 years, actually. And he has never been fired. Like, think about how many coaches can say that. Like, probably 0. Because he left at the end of his contract at Saint Etienne. So
Sir Alex Ferguson, right?
Yeah,
he
exactly.
Yeah, because he left Aberdeen for Man U and then retired.
Yeah, exactly. And so really impressive. And the last little stat about him: the 3 seasons at Saint Etienne before he got there, the average position was 11th. While he was there, they were a European team. Their average league position was 6th. 3 seasons before he got to Lille, their average league position was 8th. Now, after they finished 17th that we mentioned, and even that he was there for only like, you know, half the season. After that, their average finish has been 3rd. You know, they got a 4th in there as well, and then now this season they're 1st. So like the stats back it up. He's a really good manager. How good? Who knows? Will he ever leave France? Who knows? But he's one of the best French coaches.
Yeah, I agree with you. The personality off the field, not the style on the field, reminds me a bit of Lucien Favre, because that was one of the things with him, was he's not dominating in the media, and therefore he had trouble setting the narrative for his teams. And I think you saw in Dortmund a lot of what went wrong maybe wasn't on the field, but it was cultural around it. And so I wonder if Galtier would get stuck in a similar situation. But this team has been awesome. You mentioned the defensive performances. And I talked about a lot of the pieces they've brought in. I didn't mention Sven Botman,
a
21-year-old Dutch center back who, left center back, has been phenomenal this year. And again, they sold Gabriel to Arsenal in the window, and to replace him, they bring in, at the time, a 20-year-old Dutch center back from Heerenveen, who was highly rated as a prospect, but not as you're going to win the French league and have the best defense in Europe right now type player. And again, I think tip of the cap to Jose Font for being that stability next to him. And he's been awesome this year. I think he's been the best defender in France. And the numbers and the rumors are already starting to fly on where he could go next and how much he could be worth.
Yeah, he's in the 92nd percentile for progressive passes for a center back, and he's left-footed. Like, that just equals big dollar signs.
Ching ching.
Yeah, right. And the one other person we can't forget to say is Mike Magnon, their 25-year-old goalkeeper, has been incredibly consistent and reliable, and one of the best goalkeepers in Ligue 1. He's made in the last 16 months just one error, and this was as of January 10th. So I'm not sure if he's maybe made an error since. And he had never given away a penalty in his entire career. So a reliable goalkeeper, and he's a guy that you'll probably hear of going to another bigger club in the future again. If they need to sell someone, because he could also command a big fee. A lot of people were saying like he was almost as good as Edouard Mendy, who ended up going to Chelsea. So like, a lot of talent. And we didn't even mention like Boubakary Samara, who's been linked with Man United, Arsenal, and Leicester. So just like loads of talent on this team. And yeah, just like really, really impressive. So let's kind of like get to like right now. They're up 3 points in the league over PSG, 7 games to go. Still a couple big games left against Lyon and Lens, which is their kind of rival. And PSG don't really have any big games left, although Neymar could be suspended for 3 games. I think we're finding out from the French authorities what his suspension will look like, if it's just 1 game or if it's more than that. We shall see. I mean, we might find out after the end of recording this, for all we know. But, what would a title mean for Lyon? I mean, for Lille, Dave?
It's hard to say because they won that title in the early 2010s, as we said, with the Hazard group. And they sold a lot of those players to kind of keep the club around. And they weren't able to make it sustainable. And so I think one of the things for a lot of these groups, one of the big ones you'd look at, I think, is Leicester City, right? They win the title. Okay, well, what are you going to do next? They went out and at first they stalled. They went and bought, I think, more established players at big numbers. That didn't really work. But since then, under Brendan Rodgers and the group they've put together a side that will compete consistently for 10, 12 years. You have to question for Lille. Now, winning a title is everything in sports. And so you want to get that done this year. But with a new ownership group, with Campos leaving, with potentially Galtier leaving, we don't know. What will it mean long term? I think is a question mark that you can't answer. For fans in the city and for the players on this team, I think it will mean everything. And it was around mid-December when we started hearing that the club might be bankrupt. And from that moment on, their performances raised. And so I think you have a young group that knows that they have an opportunity here, that it's probably the last time they'll all be together because of the financial reality of this club. And so it seems like they're kind of playing with the there is no tomorrow mentality. And they've been awesome. So I think it would mean a ton right now. Long term for the club, I think it's a big question mark of just what they can do with this. Like, what if they qualify for Champions League next year, if they win the league, how can they make that sustainable flow going forward? Even if it's not competing at this level, it's still being higher year to year and a more stable club than you have been over the past 60 years.
Yeah, and I think the biggest question really is Christophe Galtier. There have been rumors all year about Lyon coming in hard for him. This has been reported in L'Equipe and as recently as like a couple of weeks ago, or it might have even been last week. And to me, they can sustain a loss if it's a few players. If they say to like 3 or 4 players, you guys got to go, just the money is what it is. But I don't think they can really afford him because, I mean, as he proved at Saint Etienne, he can build a stable club. When he was at Saint Etienne, there was not like peaks and valleys. It was like, okay, maybe 3rd, maybe 8th, maybe 6th, but it didn't really go have drastic results and difference. But if he leaves, all of a sudden you've lost Campos and Galtier in the same year. That's tough. And then what? You have to find a coach that matches all of these players and has to instill a new philosophy. And I just think it could get really messy if he leaves. Now, the positive thing is that like he believes in loyalty. I mean, he stayed at Saint Etienne for 8 years. Like that speaks for itself. And I think the other interesting thing is what this means for the league, because, I think this would give hope to Lyon and Monaco. And, could Poch be fired if they lose in the Champions League and they get out of the league? And they don't win the league, like that could be a fireable offense for Pochettino. And then the other thing hanging over the French league generally is Neymar paused his contract negotiations. His contract finishes in the summer of 2022, so in essentially 1 year. Mbappe his contract finishes in 2022, so essentially 1 year. That means their contracts they're either going to be sold this summer or they'll have to sort out a contract. So this hangs over everything if PSG isn't able to win the title. And I think it's just fascinating.
I agree with you. And I think it's a league we know that's in flux right now because of the TV deal as well and where they stand in Europe. And can you compete with the PSG? And obviously PSG have won, all these continuous titles, but they have been challenged year in and year out. It's just always been from a different team. So the question is, can anyone else find sustainability? And so you mentioned Galtier and Lyon, and a lot of that makes sense.
Dave, I'm going to push back for a second. They've not been challenged every year. After that Monaco team left, they have not really been challenged. Like by this time,
but the Monaco team was 2018, and now
that was not
2018.
It was 2016-17.
Okay, so they've been challenged. Has Juve been challenged?
They've been challenged
Have
more.
Bayern been challenged
in April?
every year?
In April, the season's all finished in terms of they've won the league by 15 points or something like that every year. Sorry to interrupt you, but go on.
No, that's fair. You make a fair point. In my mind, there's been a team that's been able to push them over the course of the years, but it's always been a different group. So it's never been a team that can build on their success. And I think Galtier at Lyon makes sense because Lyon, I think, is the one club that has shown that they will fight to compete year in and year out. Now, obviously, they go to the Champions League semifinal last year. They don't qualify for the Champions League this year. And so there has been an up and down for them as a group. The other thing to remember is they're Saint Etienne's biggest regional rival. And that's the club that Galtier was at for a number of years. So probably would not sit well with that fan base, but not sure it would affect Galtier's decision. So it's fascinating to see going forward. 7 games left, Josh. Do you think they win the title?
Man, I'm not that good I don't know that much about Ligue 1 to just making predictions. I listen to some pods and stuff, and people seemed pretty bullish on them. The one thing I think that's in their corner is the fact that PSG haven't been in a real title challenge of late. As I mentioned to you, I'm actually just looking at it now. 2018-19, when Lille got second in the league, the PSG were they won the league by 16 points. Last year, they won the league by 12 points. Technically, the season was cut short, but 12 points, and that was with a game in hand. So they haven't been in a real serious title fight in a while. And, I don't know if they have the stones for it. I really don't know. So as that's me of kind of pushing and saying, I don't really know. But what I do know is also that Monaco is not out of this. They're the hottest team in France right now and playing really, really well and have a lot of talent. So I could see them making a late run. 4 points this late is difficult, but it's not insurmountable. So I don't know.
Just to point out, because I always have to think about this with title races, PSG obviously still in Champions League. Huge Champions League tie coming up. We know how important that competition is to them. And Monaco beating Metz yesterday, they're still in the Coupe de France. And so both those teams have other competitions to think about, where for Lille, the only thing they have to think about is the league. They got knocked out of Europa League by Ajax in a pretty good series, 2-1 losses on both sides. And they got knocked out, as we said, from Coupe de France by PSG. So they've competed in those competitions. They just, I think, went up against 2 of the best teams that were left outside of themselves. But their sole focus is the league, while these other teams have other competitions to worry about and midweek matches and all of that. And I think that gives Lille a slight advantage, even with the loss of Jonathan David, for what it looks like will be about a month.
Yeah. But the other thing we didn't mention, I should say, is that, or we did mention it, but should be, mentioned again, is that Neymar could be suspended for 3 games.
For a red card he picked up against Lille on Saturday to close out the game, which was a shocking red card as well. And even if he's not, Josh, the focus is Champions League for that group. Yeah. And I don't think Pochettino will be fired if they lose Ligue 1 this year. I think that the ownership group wanted him enough that they wouldn't do that this quickly. So I don't think it will be panic for them if they're trailing late and shift the focus, but there's no way you can get around that the holy grail for PSG is the European competition, and that might take their eyes off of the Ligue 1 race.
Should be really interesting. Any final thoughts, Dave?
Josh sheds a tear for the PSG ownership group and all of the issues they're going to have replacing the most expensive players with the most expensive players. Maybe they'll be forced to play players out of their academy who are all elite, including two of the guys on Lille, Upamecano, and everyone else in the world who they never play. The one thing that popped to mind in thinking about this Lille story is the other groups. And I think about this, you and I are both American, obviously. And we watched less now, but before, a lot of college basketball. And college basketball, player comes in, they only have 4 years and they leave. So you think of like classes because teams can't stay together. And so in this Lille conversation, I think of what, the other teams that have kind of sprout up quickly, had a really bright shine, and then went away just as fast. And sometimes it's money. Sometimes it's just a coincidence of timing. Sometimes it's great recruitment. So some of the clubs that I thought of, and I'm curious what other people out there think of when they think of this Lille story, is the Martin O'Neill Aston Villa sides, where it felt like, wow, this is the fifth big team. They're going to be a Champions League side. Gabby Abanglahor, Ashley Young, all those players.
Yeah, I wouldn't put them in the. I wouldn't put them in the rest of the conversation with the people you're about to mention. I just wouldn't. Like,
oh, interesting.
I wouldn't.
You don't think that they're as high?
No.
Interesting.
Not even close.
Okay, so that was the first team I thought of. The second team was Riquelme's Villarreal side, where you watch that team and it's like, for years after, I'd always check La Liga table where Villarreal was.
Yeah,
and they were always bottom 10. And that was just the one group that really hit for them. Obviously, Santi Cazorla came past a little bit later, but Capdevila, Champions League players, World Cup winners, and Riquelme as well in that side. Monaco's had these teams as well that have gone up and down. A friend of mine, because I was talking about this with him, brought up Malaga, which was a perfect
I thought that was a great example, yeah.
Yeah, so 2012, 2013, they won their Champions League group. Roque Santa Cruz came into this team. I wrote down a list because I couldn't remember off the top of my head. Isco, De Michelis, Saviola, Joaquin, Willie Cabello, and then obviously Santa Cruz off the bench. That's a loaded squad. And it was outside investment taking over, spending, making it great. And then it was gone about 2 years later, and they've never reached that same level again. So those were the big ones that came to my mind. I think it's different than, because you mentioned Monchi earlier, and he's considered one of the great directors. He builds Sevilla teams. He has to sell them off, but he does it again. I think Benfica and Porto have been in a similar spot, but that's the reality of those clubs, and they operate in that. And it's less, all of a sudden we were really good, and then we kind of went away from it. And the other one that came up, which I didn't put in here, it's a little bit of a different style, is Wolfsburg. Yeah. The Edin Dzeko team that won the title, Graffiti with the back heel goal in the 5-0 win against Bayern. We both were getting into the Bundesliga when that happened, and remember that team, and then they sold all the pieces and they've never reached that level again.
The one that I would add there, although I don't know if it necessarily fits, is the PSV teams of the 15 years ago,
2002 to 2006.
I was thinking of 2004 or 5,
they went to the Champions League semifinal back-to-back years. Alex at center back, DeMarcus Beasley, legend. Yeah, that's a good one as well. Now, but with PSV, they're still top 3 in their league.
I know. It's
But you are right.
I mean,
I think that fits. So I want to know what other people think for this conversation. I had like the, Trabzonspor spends every once in a while. Do you remember CFR Cluj? They brought in Demba Ba and went to a Champions League round of 16. But those are maybe a little bit different. I'm curious what other people have in their mind as comparisons to this Lille group. Now, hopefully, this isn't the case, right? Hopefully, Lille turns themselves into more of a Leicester City and have some sustained success with this group. If it's not winning a title every year, it's still being up there, because it was just, I remember Hazard, and then it all just disappeared for a number of years and then came back in 2018 and 19.
Exactly. Well, this has been a really enjoyable chat as always, Dave.
Yeah, always fun.
The music for this episode was provided by Blue Dot Sessions, and you can find more information about the music in the episode show notes. Thanks for listening to Football Today. We'll be back on Monday with another episode in our usual format. See you then.